So welcome everyone to this 1-hour webinar, Accelerating the Food Value Chain, Decarbonisation Using Productivity and Systems Innovation Approach. My name is Jared Leake. I'm the CEO for the Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity. We were the leaders on this study, and I'll be introducing all the other partners on the study very shortly. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and to their connections to land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to the elders of the past, present and into the future. And for today, this session is being recorded, and that recording and those slides will be distributed hopefully sometime later this week or early next week. So you'll be able to go through that at your own leisure. So today, yes, we're talking about value chain decarbonisation using energy productivity and systems innovation thinking. And so this is a study sponsored by Race for 2030 with these contributing partners of AgriFutures UTS, Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity and Climate-KIC. And for those of you who are not overly familiar with Race for 2030, this is a cooperative research centre, the largest ever put together by the federal government in Australia, with a focus on energy productivity, running across 4 streams. And the stream that we're working in today is known as the business stream. That business stream has 5 different themes. And the very first theme of that is about energy productivity and a value chain approach. And so that's where this study has originated from, and with these partners. And the project team executing this was UTS, Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity, and Climate-KIC. And just kick off with an intro just to let you know how we sort of came to where we are. A2EP have been working on the concept of value chains for many, many years. And in 2017, worked on the report known as the Next Wave Innovation Report. And that looked at the shelter, built environment, as well as food value chains. And those reports are on our website. They kicked off a lot of different studies and interest in the concept of taking a value chain approach. And we'll have an introduction more detailed on energy productivity and what it means value chains coming up for you. But that work done in 2017 led to different studies, which really found some exciting gains, certainly in fruit production, and what can happen when you take a food value chain sort of approach. And so that really has developed the thinking, and it's come on further since then. And early in the start of Race for 2030, some 2 years ago, there was an opportunity assessment done to look at the potential of taking a value chain approach. And that uncovered a lot of opportunities there, as one would expect after the earlier research done, and suggesting that more studies, specific studies like what we've done here, should be undertaken. Also with that within Race is another theme looking at Industry 4.0 solutions for energy productivity. And it's a really exciting nexus which comes together that one enables the other, a value chain approach and Industry 4.0 solutions. Those 2 things work really well together. But that is a technology, only a technology solution. To really get gains and bring a whole value chain along, this systems innovation thinking is required. And that's why we have Climate-KIC here to bring in and really round off the way that's done. And we certainly know when you have a systems innovation approach and you look at this in a wide perspective, we've seen the results from this MECLA. People have heard about MECLA, MECLA. It's the Materials and Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance. It was kicked off a couple of years ago by WWF. Some ways that the foundational work done by A2EP may have led to some of this work, but this is in the built environment. There's now a lot of different players working together to decarbonise the built environment. And so this Carbon Leaders Alliance is really working well. And so the question is, what can be done in the food value chain? Is the food industry ready for this, and how could we go about it? And so to talk about this today, I'd like to hand you over to the very safe hands of Belinda Whelan, who's going to take us through what was found in this study. Belinda is the Director of Strategic Projects at Climate-KIC and a very strong lead in this project and knows all the ins and outs, and she's going to host us today. Belinda, I'll hand over to you and take us through the results of the study.
Thank you, Jared. So we have two main goals of today's session. The first is really to look at what we've learned over the last 6 months with working from multiple players across the food value chain. And the second, and this is really important, is to look at the next steps of what do we do with that information? How do we take action, and how do we build a potential community, a consortium that can help drive this, the recommendations forward? So in order to do that, for the agenda, we've got 3 main sections today. The first, we're going to run a panel with 2 of the researchers that were involved in the study, and I'll introduce both of those researchers very shortly. The second part will have some audience Q&A, so there'll be a chance for you to ask questions to our panel about what you've heard and about what interests you on the topic. So as the panelists are talking, I encourage you to write those questions down and or just add them directly to the chat as we go through, and we can utilize that in the Q&A section. And then finally, we're going to have a wrap up, a reflection on what we've heard and some of the key messages. We will hand back to Jared to close out the session. Now, before we jump to the panel, we wanted to run a short networking activity. You will hear from us that collaboration is a key theme, is a key way that we can actually take this these recommendations forward. And so this networking is a chance for you to connect with someone that you already know, and or meet someone new in the food value chain that you haven't met before. Now, how it will work is we will shortly jump to breakout rooms of a couple of people, 3 or 4 people. And in those rooms, I would encourage you to share your name, where you are from, and share what brings you to this webinar and why you're here today. It won't run for long, just a couple of minutes, and then you'll get a pop-up and you'll be brought back within 60 seconds. Now, if you don't join a room, sometimes the tech works, sometimes it's not 100% perfect, just sit tight and you'll be back in 3 minutes. So on that note, I'm going to ask Melissa to break us out into groups now, please. Welcome back, everyone. Did anyone want to say anything since they've returned? So we've definitely got everyone back. Yes. Can see everyone back.
I'll go just very briefly. Great breakout room, thank you. Whether by luck or brilliance, some great contacts and something I didn't even know existed will be really useful, the Race for 2030 CRC. So thank you.
Perfect. Excellent. That's exactly the point. Hopefully meet someone new, learn something new, and make some new contacts. Thank you. Anyone else? No. Great. Okay. Well, next I have the great privilege of introducing our panel. So we have Alan Pears who works at A2EP and RMIT and is an all-round energy productivity guru. And we also have Melissa Edwards, who works at UTS and has a deep, deep knowledge of all things building collaboration, working across value chains, thinking in systems, taking systems approaches. So we have a really great diverse group on our panel today. Welcome, Alan and Melissa. Now, I've got a few questions for you both. At the beginning of this study, we had a hypothesis that there would be 3 concepts that could be really valuable to the food value chain to help them decarbonise, and that they should be explored and connected. And those 3 concepts were energy productivity, which you've heard a little bit about in Jared's opening. The second one was taking a value chain approach. And the third one was taking a systems innovation approach. And we undertook a 6-month process. So we took these concepts and we listened and we went through interviews and focus groups and desktop research with industry. And we tested these concepts with industry to help come up with some recommendations on how you might connect them and take them forward. But one big insight that we found was that while energy productivity is acknowledged to be beneficial in the food sector, it's really not a priority. It's not something that many people are focused on at the moment. Alan, are you able to tell us more about this? Just a quick check-in on housekeeping as well. If you'd like to see Alan when he talks, just press the side-by-side speaker view on your Zoom and it will allow you to see both the slides and Alan. So just a quick housekeeping. Yeah. So Alan, over to you. Can you tell us more about energy productivity? Why does it matter? Why should we be thinking about it in the food value chain?
Yeah, well, if you just take the next slide, I'll start with the simple definition, which is that it's about the value delivered per unit of energy. In techo terms, we use primary energy, which is like the raw energy, the coal or the oil or the gas. But its aim is to capture the full economic value from each unit of energy that we're using. And so it takes into account what we call multiple benefits. So the key thing here really is that energy productivity goes way beyond energy saving or energy efficiency, which is about doing things more efficiently. It's about transforming opportunity. So that's where the multiple benefits come in. And what we find with a lot of energy productivity actions is that the multiple benefits that flow on from doing the energy productivity work are often worth far more than the value of the energy saved itself. So this is very important because this is why we believe energy productivity is a very useful lens to look at something like the food value chain. So the simple definition is, as just there on the screen, energy productivity is the output value divided by the input energy. And it really does provide a toolkit to underpin practical action. And it's a new way of looking at and identifying and capturing lots of benefits. So the sorts of benefits we see, for example, if you're planning to install renewable energy, if you do an energy productivity approach, you may be able to have a much smaller renewable energy system, or alternatively get much more useful energy out of your renewable energy industry system. And so that will give you capital benefits. We find a lot of people, once they've got the information systems in place and the understanding of the energy systems, they often can optimize their maintenance, reduce reject rates, improve product quality and consistency. They can often gain OH&S benefits for workers. And it just goes on and on and on, the amazing things that can happen. And of course, Jared mentioned earlier that A2EP has been doing some work in this area. And one early project was just simply putting real-time sensors in food at a farm and tracking it right through the supply chain to the store. And you start to realise the inefficiencies that are occurring at the interfaces between all of the individual companies. You start to discover that, you know, if the workers leave the cold food on the loading dock for a while they go to lunch, that impacts on the food quality. So you might lose more food, but you'll also have to recool the food with more energy and so on. So there are lots of factors like that that come through. And I guess, I mean, as something of a bit of a nerd, I find that good energy analysis unravels the fundamental principles of physics and chemistry, as well as the energy flows. And you start to then compare what you're doing, not with what the guy down the road's doing or what you did last year or what you might do next year. You can start to ask fundamental questions about where did all this energy go? And that then flows through to identifying changes in practices, processes, technologies, business models, and all sorts of remarkable outcomes. So I might stop the sales job there.
You've sold me, Alan. I'm sold on energy productivity. But I think what was important there is you really talked about the interfaces, the connections between. And so that really lends itself to taking this idea of a value chain approach, the second concept that we had in our hypothesis when we began. Now, when we ran the study, we found that individual organisations across the chain are doing a huge amount of work to decarbonise within their businesses, particularly on scope 1 and scope 2, but we didn't see a huge amount of action of value chain type approaches. Melissa, can you share more about the value chain approach and the benefits of taking this type of logic?
Thank you. Yes, exactly. And I think the thing that really drew me into wanting to be part of this exciting research team was exactly this conundrum that we find ourselves in. Often when we're talking to companies in the current context of considering where their emissions are, they're rightly so focused on their own activities and then their immediate purchasing decisions. So that interface that immediately exists on either side of their inputs and outputs, if you like to think of it that way. But what we find is that for many companies, and including quite large companies, something like, 2/3 or more of their actual emissions in the delivery of their product or service from, the point of extraction right through to the customer is actually found outside of that, their immediate scope, or what we might call scope 1 and scope 2. And so understanding this in the context of some other research we were doing here at UTS, I thought, wow, this seems to really make sense in relation to this idea of energy productivity, and a really useful way to help us think outside of just our immediate inputs and outputs in terms of, why we would think about our own business and its viability, is to understand that actually some of the risks and opportunities sit in that extended upstream and downstream activities. So we can turn it away from thinking about this only just as a risk into thinking about how can we see the opportunities that would lie in thinking about, decarbonisation or our emissions across that entire set of interrelated activities from, extraction right through until when it ends up in the homes of consumers. The other really thing that's important about a value chain perspective is that it helps us see not only just the supply chain. So often we're thinking about procurement when we think about how we can influence energy and energy productivity. But when we start to think through the value chain perspective, the consumer and the demand side approach becomes really, really obvious, because small shifts and changes in consumer demands and preferences can actually have a effect right back down to that extraction phase of a value stream. And increasingly consumers, and we know, recent surveys have shown how consumers are increasingly concerned about action on climate. Then as they become more aware of where emissions are and where embodied carbon is in their everyday purchasing decisions, we might start to see that demand side come into play in an even bigger way in relation to thinking through, the sets of interrelated activities in those food value chains. So it's important both from a risk and an opportunity perspective. It helps us see the overall value that's embedded within this stream from beginning to end. And the really key piece of this is, as Alan's just been saying in terms of energy productivity, we can start to understand where the opportunities are for collaboration. So when we're talking about wanting to reduce emissions outside of immediate scopes, new conversations begin. How do we share data? How do we have traceability? How can we have transparency? And that's not only a technology fix, that's the way that we communicate with each other. That's the story of the value of a product from the beginning to end. That's the branding of a product. So we really get into some interesting areas of how we can think through collaboration in these food value streams.
Yeah, so as companies are looking more and more towards this scope 3, this idea of energy productivity and value chains really starts coming into play and being a really two beneficial concepts. But Alan, I'm a bit confused. Why is it not mainstream already? Like why is this not? Why did we not find this more when we ran the research?
Yeah, well, if you go back to, gurus of industry like Porter, you find that most businesses are focused on their immediate inputs and their immediate customers. And this is where a big thing about the value chain is that it's got the end consumer included, where most supply chain work and other work finishes at the point when the food's sold. Well, you know, half the food waste is happening after it's been sold to someone. And so that means the consumer is important. And another factor why the consumer is important is that the consumer uses a lot of energy running fridges and cooking and all sorts of things like that. And in fact, one of the major household fridge companies is now saying that its fridge can protect your food and extend its life by 3 to 5 times over a traditional fridge. So that has quite big implications for the whole supply chain and for impacts of food waste. So this is the sort of thing that you start finding once you look at a value chain. In terms of why it's not a priority, I think part of it is because, again, most businesses are looking at just the next stage. And so, for example, if you are the retail store, hidden in the cost of all of your inputs is the cost of all of the energy, and as we get carbon pricing, all the cost of carbon, right back to where the food was grown. And so, but that's hidden. It's just part of the input cost. People don't separate it out. So I think that's one reason why energy productivity is not a key factor. But I think also what we find is that when we consulted with lots of people, we found that there were a number of key drivers. And what's interesting about these key drivers is that energy is enmeshed in all of them. So, for example, a key thing for a lot of the businesses we talked to was cutting food waste. And that's where, if you waste food, all of the energy and emissions embodied in the whole production system have just been lost. As Melissa and Belinda have talked about, there's increasing pressure to cut direct carbon emissions from businesses, and that includes things like refrigerants. And again, when you look at refrigerants, the people we talked to were very focused on the global warming potential of the refrigerant. But in fact, if your refrigeration system leaks, which many do, you are losing energy efficiency because the coefficient of performance of the equipment declines, and also its cooling capacity declines. So your ability to run your business is being undermined if you are allowing your refrigerant to leak. And of course, that leaking is also then a contributor to climate change. So there was a lot of interest too in optimizing packaging, and there are two sides to that. Of course, there's the energy in the packaging and the processing, but increasingly, well-designed packaging can actually extend food life. So there's a kind of two-sided picture there with packaging. A lot of companies are looking at increasing renewable energy capacity, but again, if you can dramatically improve your energy efficiency and management, you can get much more value out of your renewable system. And for example, if you're putting in solar, if you're down south where I am, there's a lot of times in winter when we don't have all that much solar energy. And so you'll be relying on gas or hydroelectricity or batteries, which are all a lot more expensive and potentially have high carbon impacts. So there are a lot of things in here that it's not simple to just say, oh, I'm going to go renewables, that'll fix everything. And of course, everyone was interested in cutting costs and improving their profit margins. So all of these things are really linked to energy productivity. And if we can understand the energy flows and understand what's possible and look at, identify the inefficiencies and things like that, that's how we make energy productivity a priority. Because it's not either or, it's part of a lot of what people are thinking about anyway, but a lot of them have just haven't put the bit into place.
Yeah, interesting. So it can be, what I'm hearing is it can be embedded into all of these other things that are major priorities and help to speed up the decarbonisation of those priorities. It's something, it's almost like an enabler for all of those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So we didn't just stop there. If I go back to the initial hypothesis that I shared at the very beginning, so we said energy productivity, we thought that that would be an important concept. We thought that value chains would be important, but we also added a third concept, which was to take a systems innovation approach. This is one that's quite close to my heart. Melissa, can you talk to us more about this concept and how it relates to energy productivity, food value chain and food value chains?
I think what's really cool about the systems innovation approach is that people, when we spoke to them, were actually talking about systems innovation. They just weren't using that terminology. And even listening to Alan talk, then I can hear already a number of different systems levers, we call them system levers, that you've mentioned that need to come into play in a coordinated fashion in order to enable these energy productivity gains. And this is really important, right? The key takeaway is most people think it's a technology solution, right? We have a focus on innovative technologies and we'll get these energy productivity gains. We'll be able to reduce our emissions. But this is what the Climate-KIC model looks like. And this is why I enjoy it so much, because it is complex. Now, at the moment, we haven't scientifically tested this model in this particular study. We were using it as a testing device to see how it would relate to people when we spoke to them about why a systems innovation approach is important, or is it important? And it really resonated. And, even for some of these simple things that we've just discussed, let's say it's the innovation that might relate to a certain form of energy saving technology in terms of your inputs, whether it's renewable energy or some other source of input there. The ability to be able to bring that into the business model may mean a shift in capital allocation. It may mean new financing arrangements. It might mean different policy levers on incentivize this behaviour from government, which can then lead into different ways in which consumers understand the benefits of those products, and that can lead to a shift in market demand. Likewise, it could go back the other way. We could have a shift in market demand, which creates a change in the business model. And so what this systems innovation model allows us to do is to kind of test hypotheses about where the best kicks or shifts might be located within a system, within all those infrastructures that are put in place to enable us to have, a value stream in the first place, to get a product from point A to point B, and to then really experiment in terms of where those shifts and kicks are going to be most efficient and effective. And then through collaboration, if we're adopting a value chain approach, work with people, work with the key players from the beginning to end, to actually, in a coordinated way, understand how those benefits are going to be achieved across the interconnected sets of services. So, often we see this happen where we might see a change in one part of the system, but it's not well communicated or understood by everybody else. And so the real benefits are not able to be realised or achieved through that value stream approach combined with systems innovation.
Yeah, and I think this is actually where we're seeing, if I think about MECLA, they're doing this really well. So they've got different working groups that are operating across these levers of change, coming up with interventions that may support. So individually, they might create small changes in the system, but collectively, if you take all of those levers and interventions as a whole, they create much more rapid transformations. And I guess that's what we're looking to do here as well. Very close to my heart, as I mentioned. So we have these three concepts. We have energy productivity, we have value chain approach, we have systems innovation approach, all great theories. What do we do? This was the next big question that the research team grappled with when we met with industry through these different interviews and focus groups. And I'd like to hand back to you, Melissa, just to talk through what did we find? What's our recommendations of how we connect these pieces together? What needs to happen?
Well, without getting too geeky here, I know already, Alan, I have to blame you. You did already mention Porter. We are seeing actually this shift towards what's called shared value and shared value creation, or even people are talking about sort of collective impact models in the way which we would escalate the type of changes that we need across systems to really start to decarbonise. So in all of these models, collaboration is key, right? You've got it written there, got your exclamation mark. It is key, and we can't emphasize it enough. And I don't think that point in and of itself is rocket science, but collaboration often is rocket science and does require concerted effort on behalf of the people who are involved in that system where you're trying to create shared value, or where you're trying to create that shift or kick within a system. So as a research team, there's nothing much we can do in terms of saying, this is the answer. It's neatly tied up with a bow, and we're presenting it here as a fully formed propositional plan. But what we have decided through looking at what has happened around the world, where value chain methods have enabled some efficiencies in at least identifying where these opportunities for co-benefits are, is to take a kind of consortia approach. So to bring together the key players who are actually the participants in that value stream right across the board. And it might be through either the peak bodies or through the major players in a specific area of a value stream. So maybe focused on a product or a product category or a particular market, depending on how you want to organize it. And that those grouped together would look through that systems lens at the ways in which they can start to think through a strategy that would enable those efficiencies and productivity to be gained within that value stream. So we had a go at doing this based on what participants in our study already told us. And we've developed a cascade strategy, which we think could be a really good starting point, but obviously it would need to evolve with the input of those players. And really the idea of a cascade strategy is that it's very broad. It sets an overall vision. And for us, the vision for energy productivity is that it can deliver multi-benefits through system innovation capabilities, and the need for these cross-cutting policy mechanisms that would enable us to really leverage different technologies, not just have those technologies introduced, to then understand and map where the decarbonisation is occurring and be able to communicate what the benefits of that are. You know, we do have legislated targets in this country now, so being able to effectively communicate contribution towards those legislated targets is going to become increasingly important. And then sitting under that is just 3 key areas of activity that we thought most people seem to really be talking about in various different ways within the work that we've already done. One area was really focused on innovation of various different kinds, whether that be innovation in technologies, the shared outcomes, maybe different ways of thinking through logistics and how they're organised, the timing, looking at cyclical and seasonal variation in the way that produce comes to market, for example. These are forms of innovation that are not just based on technology, but are reliant on the communication between people in that system. The second key area would be on the customer focus. So really looking at that sort of demand-led approach, and how do we think through the way in which energy productivity gains can be enabled through different patterns of consumption, and then ensuring that the value stream is actually meeting and enabling that. And then the third area of activity is really in what we're doing today, in a sense, and what we've been doing throughout the study, which is in that capability development. If we know what we need to do, but we don't know how to do it, then we're not really going to be able to mobilise the action and the activity around there. So we think the testing of specific prototypes and then being able to lift people's capabilities across the value stream in a coordinated way is the most effective way to ensure that these solutions are implementable, that they have an impact, that we can track that impact and communicate it over time.
Thanks, Thanks, Melissa. I've got a rainbow that's hitting. This happened yesterday, actually, when we. I'll shut my curtain in a moment, but before I do, Alan, can we get a bit more? So Melissa's talked at the high level of this strategy. Like, what specifically could this consortium do? What types of actions could it take?
Yes, well,
I'm going to stop that rainbow.
Okay. Yeah, so it's I think we've got a good framing there, but yes, what's some practical kind of ideas? So that's what I'll talk about here. So the first thing is, a lot of people are doing a lot of quite impressive work on lots of different issues across the food value chain. I've just put one example there of the Fight Food Waste CRC's direct tool, which tracks material flows and carbon emissions right across the whole system, but also groups like FILE, AgriFutures, and the Australian Food Cold Chain Council these people are really doing a lot of interesting and really valuable work, and it would be a bit silly and inefficient if we just ignored that and tried to reinvent the wheel. So we see real opportunity in building on what a lot of good people are already doing, and they've actually built a lot of resources that could potentially be developed and tweaked a bit to incorporate energy productivity. So that's a key element. I think that also highlights the fact that there are some parallels emerging that are going to support this focus on energy productivity. One of them is the circular economy movement, which is very much about collaboration and resource management, and also the digitalisation revolution, which, as Jared said, A2EP and UTS have been working on recently. These are enormously powerful tools to help us build shared value and implement it as well. So the second broad area is really identifying and addressing areas where that have to be involved in driving the overall value chain benefit. And so this is about standardizing data and platforms. It's about understanding the impacts so that if one company changes their behaviour, that may have positive impacts or negative impacts on others. And unless we understand them and can value them and address them creatively, we can have people blocking change and blocking collaboration. So it's very important to find the problems, but also overcome them and grab the amazing opportunities that are emerging. And the third element really is the understanding of multiple benefits today is still pretty basic. There are a few studies in Europe. There's a thing called the Combi tool that tries to monetize the value of multiple benefits. There's the M-Benefits website, which tries to help businesses to incorporate recognition of multiple benefits of energy productivity into strategic decision-making, capital investment, things like that. And more recently, there's one called MICAT, which is Multiple Impacts Calculation Tool, which again is trying to kind of make this stuff practical. And I think that's a really big area that we just have to deal with. And we are reasonably close to the leading edge, because the leading edge is not that far progressed so far. So, you know, they're the sorts of things where I think collaboration and constructive, creative creation of value and understanding of value are the sorts of things that a consortium like what we're suggesting could really make a big difference.
So we know collaboration is key, exclamation mark. We know there's a plan, there's a strategy of what the early action could take. So there's a focus, there's these key actions that this group could take. My question to everyone online is, who should be involved in this? Who are the influencers within the food value chain that could really help to drive this type of consortium? Obviously, the research group is super passionate about this, Race is passionate about this, and we have some of the industry reference group that were passionate, but I'm interested to hear from you as to who else you think could be involved to set up some sort of consortium. Now, we have the chat function. If you would take a moment, just 30 seconds, to have a think about that question, about who are the influencers that could be involved in this, I'd encourage you to add that to the chat function now. So take a few seconds. Any thoughts on who do you think could drive this type of collaboration? Organisation.
This is your chance to dob in people.
That's right. Exactly, Alan. Circular Australia. Yeah, absolutely. Australian Sustainable Finance Initiative. Oz Harvest. A specific specific name, Oz Harvest, local food advocacy groups like Sustain. Yeah, so here I'm seeing organisations that are acting across the food value chain. Any particular segments of the food value chain? Does anyone come to mind? Across significant influences across food need to be represented. To me, the most significant are the grocery retail majors. Their influence is massive, as is their footprint. Absolutely, Tim. And we would add to that probably the transportation companies that were more on the left-hand side of our centipede diagram, as we lovingly know it as, but couldn't agree more. So I think it's right. What I've seen here is this mix between organisations that are acting across the food value chain and specific influences within. What about ag tech investors? Yeah, some of the venture companies. And if we look at MECLA, it started with a few influences that were acting across and then within, and then it's grown from there. So they're now at the stage of, I think, over 130 members, maybe more at this point. And energy, I think what we found is energy productivity is much more in the early stages. It's still trying to build profile, but it's going to be really important to work with some of those influences early on in order to set up this consortium so that it can become more mainstream, say, if we fast forward 5 years or so. Excellent. Now it's time for Q&A from the audience. We've got probably about 7 minutes for Q&A. If you'd like to use the chat function, have you got any questions for our panel, questions that have sprung up as they've been talking? Again, take 30 seconds and jot down any questions that you might have.
While people are looking at that, I think it was interesting just trying to keep up with the suggestions in the chat. It was very interesting to see that there was a strong focus of networks and community-based groups and things like that, which highlights the emphasis of the complex system change kind of model that we were using, because it's not just technology. It's getting people to rethink lots of things.
Now, while we're waiting for questions, I might just start one off. So yeah, thinking of MECLA and its success, what do you think some of the key learnings are from that particular precedent that we could be taking on for this particular project? Either Melissa or Alan. I won't dob either of you in.
Well, I would start with that one key area that we mentioned, which is really around the sort of co-definition of what it is that we mean in relation to multiple benefits in regard to food value systems, and also where the embedded or embodied carbon is along that interrelated set of activities. So a shared understanding of that, so that can start to level up people's awareness of where those opportunities for collaboration might begin. And I think that happens really effectively where there are a key group of stakeholders involved right from the beginning in that kind of co-definition, because we as a group of advocates and researchers can start with our definition, but the interpretation, and what we've found through this study that's been really significant, is bringing the interpretations of people into the way that we're defining this problem space as we go is the most effective way to solve these complex challenges.
Perfect. Thanks, Melissa. Now, I do have a question from Natalie. How do you think local government can best support households and consumers in this space? What are the practical actions you'd like to see community doing? What kind of education and support do you think local government should be providing residents? So this one's all about local governments.
Yeah, well, I think it's more than local government. I live in a suburb in Melbourne, and one of our community groups is working with the council to buy a number of portable induction cooktops so that people can experience cooking, on induction cooking, which is a lot environmentally preferable, especially as we go to renewable electricity. You know, there are really big barriers to this because particularly Victorians have been convinced for many decades that gas is the way to go. And of course, we're finding that a lot of top chefs are now switching to induction, but we've got lots of kind of nervous people here. So that's one kind of community level thing that can happen. Again, also, I mean, councils are deeply involved in waste recovery, recycling, reprocessing, and education, and a whole lot of things like that that are central to food. They're also increasingly interested in energy. So that's where, for instance, the energy used for your fridge and your cooking and things like that are all kind of consumer activities that you can have, you know, cook-ins and all sorts of things to show people how to change.
So that real sort of user education, that's where the local governments can really support. So Justin has said Second Bite and Food Bank would be great stakeholders. So again, more of that sort of networks to connect with. And a final question from Tim: what case studies could you point to locally or globally of full value chain collaboration from producers to policymakers and the full range of commercial operators?
Oh, I wish I could come up with one. I think the reality we've got is that, you know, for example, the Fight Food Waste people have a number of working groups that are working across parts of the value chain. But I think the fact that the value chain as we frame it includes the consumer, the end consumer, as a key player and their attitudes and perspectives mean, and the reality is that we didn't find a lot of activity focused on end consumers, apart from a couple of really interesting projects at Fight Food Waste. So there's really, I don't see a perfect solution, but at the same time, that's not a reason to not go ahead, because we've got large subsets of the value chain working together. So part of what this organisation could do is help them connect with each other to you know, complete the chain.
Wonderful. Oh, did you have something to add there, Melissa?
I'll just say there are some examples of case studies which are focused on specific products, you know, internationally. But I think to the point of what we're socializing here is that kind of broader thinking about food systems. And I think, you know, some of the tools that you mentioned, Alan, were where we saw best practice in terms of building out consortia. So we can look to those, but definitely the opportunity to do something that is bringing in the commercial players alongside of the peak bodies and government is the big opportunity. And I think ASFI was mentioned here, right, as an example. I know it's not in food, but that model of what's happened with the finance sector is actually quite a useful one. We can look to MECLA as well in terms of a model.
Yeah, no, thank you. I know, Justin, I know one program in France linking farmers, producers and supply chains focused on lightening resource needs and sustainability, but staying cost competitive. So there's a couple. It's not as mainstream, and I guess that was our take. It's not mainstream, but there is a few out there. But we think there should be more. So that concludes our panel and Q&A part. Thank you, Alan and Melissa, for joining me today. I'm going to hand back to Jared to close out our session.
Thanks so much, Belinda, Alan and Melissa. That was wonderful, wonderful overview of somewhere 9 to 12 months of research and a lot of conversations. So well done to distilling it down to those key issues. Thank you so much. I thought we would just talk about a little bit as some key takeaways and get our final interaction with everyone here today and see if we can grab some things in the chat function once more. If you would be so kind as to open up that chat box and just maybe just a few words, a few sentences on your key takeaways from today. From me, if I start something, did I quote Melissa Edwards there correctly that collaboration is rocket science? Mel, did I get that right? It's like saying, hey, this is difficult. This is hard stuff. So I thought that was a nice takeaway, if I got that right, Mel.
That's right, yes.
Good. We also had that, these sort of enablers for seeing this value chain approach go ahead from Alan along circular economy and industry 4.0. Alan, if I could add to that, you've also got, advances in robotics, industry 4.0, and also renewable energy, standalone, decentralized renewable energy. And we're seeing some evidence here where this is really starting to change the way manufacturers are thinking. Instead of having to centralize all their manufacturing over the top of a gas pipeline, maybe they can be decentralized more. And I certainly am aware of examples such as, I think it's plant-based milk, maybe oat milk in this country. Most of that processing is done on one side of the country and consumed on another. And you think, is that the right way for that to be done? And with advances in renewables and on-site renewables, maybe this could be done differently. So these sorts of approaches are available. So I've got some comments coming through here. Thank you, others. Let me just read a few out. We've got it's from Tim there saying there's a US-based initiative, Renourish Studio, good, part of the farmer's footprint, bringing broad value chain groups together for change. Not engaging with consumers as yet, though. Well, I'd like to think we might start with consumers, if that's certainly what we got out of the messaging today, is you've got to think of those end user services. What service are you providing? That's usually where we always like to start. What else? Role of finance is key. Agreed, Claire, thank you. Definitely would include banks, investors, insurers, super funds in discussions. Absolutely, lots of momentum there, and people wanting to invest in social ethical, responsible funds, and insurers are starting to push this more, and certainly banks. You want to go for some a loan there. We're seeing more and more pressure coming to say, have you thought about your full supply chain emissions, and what are you doing about that? So absolutely, and certainly from an A2EP perspective, we've got a few banks wanting to work with us more here as well. Priya, complex problems need innovation, a collaborative approach to find solutions. Totally. Standardizing data and know what data matters would be a big one for me. Well said. Standardizing data and know what data matters. And I guess there's some hope of blockchain technology helping with provenance of data and what have you. So we can only hope there. But standardizing and making sure it's not garbage in, garbage out. I'm sure there's a lot of work and research to do to make sure that works well. Good. Well, it looks like that's most of them. Sorry, I may have skipped over a message there from Tracy at Race for 20. Just a link there in the chat to some projects on short food supply chains in Europe. So thanks for sharing that one, Tracy. Nice work. Okay, one more message here. Here we go. A can of tomatoes from Italy are likely to have a better energy productivity than buying tomatoes at farmers markets due to economies of scale, holistic view and co-benefits to include. Thanks for that, Heidi. And even things to say, well, is that statement there correct, and what backs that up, and how do we inform consumers and things like that? But yeah, those sorts of hypotheses is tested. And one that was just thrown around here is, and it did happen in the UK, is where a fast food chain claimed that food from them, because they've got industrial and insulated fryers and ovens and what have you, and they're not heating ovens up and down, they're keeping it constant. The food, a fast food chain in the UK certainly came out and claimed that there's less emissions there, but apparently it wasn't very well received by consumers. It didn't quite meet with their image just yet. And life cycle approach to food, as per French AgriFutures
database.
Thank
so
you.
it includes, it's about access for French food to the EU market with the new green market requirement. So the French government actually went through and did an LCA of all French food products, including different ways that consumers use it in the home, which meant that in theory there's lots of information available there. So
wonderful. Thank you so much, Tracy. And a few more comments there, and I like the final reflection here from Tim saying that partnerships is crucial, and so collaboration being vital, absolutely. And we're intending to continue to keep you all that joined today in the loop with some further correspondence when a final report comes out, and still canvassing support for building these consortia to get some momentum here. So many thanks for joining us here today. Thanks to the Race for 20 CRC for supporting this project. It's a vital piece for helping decarbonise food value chain, and with that is going to come cost of living pressure improvements, as well as we improve the amount of energy used. So a really great piece of work. So thank you for the Race for 2030 for supporting that, and the project participants have certainly enjoyed this work, and we really can see the potential benefits here. So thanks to everyone for presenting today. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to keeping in touch with you as new information and reports come available on this subject. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.